So I have always been a photographer. I've taken photos my whole life. I was exposed to photography at a young age. My father was a very serious hobbyist, I would say, and so I grew up in a household where he had built a darkroom and would shoot and develop his own 35 millimeter film and prints. So that's really where I was first exposed to the medium. And I have been shooting photos ever since. But back in 2010, I still live in the Warehouse District downtown. And in 2010, I used to work on 12th and Hennepin. And I would carry my camera with me wherever I went. And at the time, I was interested in shooting photos of kind of things I would find in my environment. So kind of urban signs of life. I would look for interesting graffiti or things that people had left behind. And as I was paying attention to the things in my environment, I wasn't paying as much attention to the people. And my route took me past the Greyhound bus station and the homeless shelter downtown. So I started to realize after some time that I was seeing the same people every day. And oftentimes I would see them at the same time or even in the exact same place. And yet we would never interact with each other. And after some time, that I started to become uncomfortable with that. I started to question why two people who see each other on a daily basis would essentially ignore each other. And so I started using my camera as an excuse to interact with the people that I was running into in my walk to and from work. So initially it was only portraits that I was taking. So I would approach someone, I would see someone and sort of visualize a picture of them in my head, and I would ask if I could take their photo. And I was absolutely terrified to do it, but I felt really compelled to do it. And so I basically forced myself to do something that was actually a fear. And sometimes people would say yes. Very often people would say no. But when they did say yes, I would take their picture and I would talk to them for a few minutes, but it was really mostly just these portraits I was taking. And then what I would do is I would go home and make just a small 3x5 print on my printer at home, and I started carrying these prints around with me in the hopes that I would see the person again and so I could show them the photo. And what started happening is when I would do that, people really liked the photo. And I could just see people would kind of light up. There was just something about, it gave me kind of some positive feedback that encouraged me to keep doing it, because I thought, boy, if I'm taking pictures of someone and they actually like the picture, well, that's really something, because most people don't like photos of themselves. So at the time, I called the project Minneapolis Strangers, and I just put it on my website and didn't think much of it. And then in 2011, I want to say, I discovered Humans of New York. And I just absolutely fell in love with it. I loved what he was doing. I loved the way that he was framing people, in their environment. And then, within a year or so, I realized that there were these other Humans of pages sort of popping up all over the world. And I thought to myself, well, someone's going to do Humans of Minneapolis. Why not me? So I relaunched my Minneapolis Strangers project as Humans of Minneapolis, and The additional challenge there was that I knew, because of Humans of New York, there's a storytelling component, there's an interview, a dialogue component. And that's something I had really never done before. So, but I knew that that would be the expectation. So in addition to the photos, I started asking people questions and recording the conversation. And after some time, you know, with a lot of practice, I started to just get better at it and become more comfortable with it. And so I would post the photos and the interviews on social media, and the project just really grew organically from there.
So, had you been taking pictures of people before this project happened?
Before this project, I really very rarely took pictures of people. And yet, the photographers who I admired the most were portrait photographers. And at the same time that this was all starting, I was also part of a photography group with Wing Young Huey, who's a well-known photographer who's also based here in Minneapolis. And he takes photos of people. And other people in the group who I admired took photos of people. And I felt I was a little resistant to it. It was like something that I knew I wanted to do, but because it was unfamiliar, I was scared to do it. So I kind of resisted that urge, even though it was there. But then when I started shooting these photos, these portraits of people that I would meet, I would bring them to, so we would share our work every month with this photography group, and I started bringing those photos. And again, it's part of sort of the positive feedback loop. I was getting really good feedback from the people in the group, including Wing, who I've admired and still admire very much. So that was something else that kind of steered me in that direction. And it's pretty interesting now, because now I only take pictures of people. And occasionally my dog, but most of the time I'm interested in taking photographs of people.
So, if you were living in the warehouse district, you had a little better than a mile walk to 12th and Hennepin, and that's kind of daily.
Back and forth every day. Yep.
Yeah, summer and winter.
Yes, although in the winter I would often go at least part of the way in the Skyway, but yes.
I see. So you had a very well established route.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you must have known every potted plant.
I did, absolutely.
Now, were you going to do something with photography at the end of that, or was your work something totally different?
My background in my education and training is in graphic design. So at the time I was working as a magazine art director. So photography, I'm almost entirely self-taught, and it's always been something that I've done as just more a creative outlet. It's never really been part of my work until I started doing this work, and then I got more serious about it, and I challenged myself to increase my skills technically, and but most importantly, I had to really work on my people skills and learning how to relate to people and learning how to draw people out, because the kinds of stories that I'm interested in tend to be stories about why we are the way we are. I'm constantly interested in what are the things that happen along our path in life that create and shape who we are. So in order to pull those kinds of stories out of people in the moment when I'm approaching them on the street is a little easier said than done, and took years of practice to really get good at it.
I can believe that. Um, so, apart from photography, what kind of a people person are you? Are you the sort of person who hides in the back of the party and waits for someone to find you, or how do you do that
I mean, I
social
think
stuff?
I've always been, I'd say, a pretty outgoing person, although I have my introvert tendencies as well. But I've always been a social person. I've always been interested in meeting people. I've always been interested in meeting people who are different from me. And I've always been a bit of a risk taker. So I'm the kind of person that if I'm scared to do something, I try to make sure that I do it, or at least attempt to do it, because I'm very comfortable being out of my comfort zone. I like being out of my comfort zone. And this takes me out of my comfort zone every single time.
Yeah. So in the family of bungee jumping and skydiving and snake handling.
Although I would say that I don't like to put myself at physical risk. I'm more willing to put myself at social risk than I am physical risk.
Now, as I was understanding the story of your daily walk, you're running into people a whole lot poorer and less employed than you are, and a whole lot less comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering kind of how that interface went, and what kinds of resistance you had, and how you handled. I mean, I don't know whether it would be harder for me if I were asked to do a photo, or for that matter a video project with the 20 richest people in Minnesota or the 20 poorest. I don't know which would be harder, really. But it would be a different board. It would be a different kind of threshold to jump over. And I'm curious how you thought about, you're dressed the way a graphic designer has to be dressed to do that job. You're walking in a purposeful way towards something that you know how to do, that people are going to pay you pretty well to do, and you're going past a bunch of people who have none of that.
Well, and 2 points. First of all, when I first did it, I was not working towards people purposefully, and I've never been paid for what I do. So I'm not. Nobody's paying me to do this, unless there's a commissioned project. But when I first did it, I was extremely nervous. I wasn't comfortable at all, and that led to some situations where, I didn't always take the time that I take now to really pick and choose people. Initially, when I first started doing it, I really didn't know what I was doing. Like anybody, when you first do something for the first time, I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants. It was only after years of practice that I became purposeful and confident about it. And I can tell you, my process now, back then I was just kind of walking up to people, and I didn't know why I was doing it. That's the thing. When I first started doing it, I didn't know why I was doing it. I had no idea why I was doing it. I just knew I felt compelled to do it, which is what artists do. We feel compelled to create things, whatever they are. There's just something inside of us that's telling us that we should be making this thing, whatever it is. But now, my approach is exactly the same, no matter who I approach, whether it's a guy in a suit downtown or whether it's a homeless person downtown. I approach people in the exact same way, which is to say, hi, my name is Steph, and I have a blog called Humans of Minneapolis, where I approach people on the street, find out a little bit about them, and take their picture. Would you be willing to be one of my subjects? So that's my approach for every single person. It doesn't differ. And no matter who they are, there's 3 possible answers. They might say no, which is completely fine. I totally understand. There's a million reasons why people would say no to something like that. So I just let them go, because it's not going to work unless they're a willing participant. If somebody doesn't want to do it, I don't want them to do it. So they might say maybe, they might have questions. Frequently, they want to know what kinds of questions am I going to ask them, which is a very legitimate question to ask. They might ask where are the photos going to appear. Again, very legitimate question to ask. And sometimes they just say yes, which is always, I should say, it used to surprise me more. It doesn't surprise me as much now, because now I understand why people would say yes. But so once, if someone says yes, I have a field recorder, audio recorder that I carry. And I start with sort of general questions that anybody could answer, but everybody's going to answer slightly different. And then I kind of look for, I like to call them threads to follow. So I might say to someone, a typical question I might start out with is, do you have a motto in life or words of wisdom that you try to live by? And the secret is that I don't care about what their motto is. The motto is not the important part. The important part is the follow-up question, which is why. Why is that your motto? Because you don't come up with a motto in life unless there's some lesson learned along the way. And that's what I'm interested in. So I follow, those kinds of threads, and what I really do, and the most important thing that I do in all of this, is that I listen to people. And I listen not only with my ears, but with my heart. And I listen actively, so I make sure that they know that I'm listening. And I try to make it really all about them. And people want to be heard. It's actually really, really important that people are given the opportunity to be heard, because a lot of people are simply ignored in this world. So I'll talk to people for anywhere from 5 minutes to 45 minutes, and I record the conversation with my audio recorder. And then once we're done talking, that's when I'll take their portrait. And I always take the portrait after the conversation, because the kind of portrait I want to take is one where the person is relaxed. And by the time we've gotten to the end of our conversation, I've hopefully gained their trust. So I shoot their photo and thank them for their time, give them my business card, and then I really try to encourage them. I try to get their contact info if I can. I encourage them to go to the Facebook page and look for the post when it's up, because inevitably what happens is the people who follow my page are a very supportive and positive community of people. And inevitably what happens when I post someone's story is people comment. And they say really, really wonderful, positive things. A lot of very encouraging words. A lot of, oftentimes, offers of help if someone expresses a need. So that's when it kind of comes full circle. If I can convince the person who I posted this, whose story I posted, to go to the Facebook page and see the wonderful comments that people have posted about them, that's when it truly becomes 100% gratifying for me. And that's when the circle becomes complete. Because when people leave those comments on my page, they're not for me. They're for the person that I interviewed. So it's important to me, if possible, if I can get them to see that.
Are your interviews fairly heavily edited? And if you're doing 45 minutes, it would have to be
very heavily edited. Yes, I spend much more time editing than I do photographing, easily, because I'm very careful about my editing. I don't, you'll never see me do an interview and then post it the same day. I'll take at least a week to really go through it and just try to you know, it's a project that's on social media, so it's got to be short. It's got to be, you know, I edit, and I also edit and post the audio. So I try to get the audio down to 2 minutes or less, and try to get the story down to 3 paragraphs or less, which takes some time to do that.
So your portraits are wherever you're grabbing the person, right? Like
Yes.
the Falling Apart Nicollet Mall or Coming Together Nicollet Mall or whatever it is.
Yep. Usually I'm downtown, but I do a lot of work in the parks in the summer. But I'm always in a public place, public space, and you know, I think of them as environmental portraits, where it's the person is important, but what's behind them is also important. So that background and kind of that environment is a big part of what I'm looking for visually.
Right. So how do you think about, you've got somebody, you've talked to the person for a while, how do you begin thinking about what you're going to do for a portrait?
You know, the portrait, when I choose someone, I choose them really, really carefully now, as opposed to when I first started, where I was terrible at it. I just wasn't good at it. But I've become very selective about what I choose. So before I even approach somebody, I spend a lot of time studying people. A lot of time just watching people. So I walk around, I'm always moving, I stay on the move so that it's a little more, it's a little less obvious than if I'm like just standing there with a camera, you know, looking around. So I walk and I walk and I walk and I study people. And it always starts with something visual. So I see the portrait that I want to take before I even approach the person. And that's what I'm trying to get when I photograph them. I'm trying to take a photograph that looks the same as what I originally saw when they were walking down the street and they didn't know I was looking at them. Because in that moment, they were really being themselves. They didn't know that they were being watched. So their guard is down. And that's what I'm trying to capture in my photos. But I don't approach people purely based on the visual. It starts with that visual. But what's more important is to find people who are going to be open to having the kind of conversation I'm interested in having, which isn't everybody. And a lot of times it has to do with what they're doing right now. So I assess people and I say, okay, you know, maybe I see somebody and I see a great portrait. It's like, oh, that's the thought I really have is, oh, I could take a great portrait of that person. I can see the portrait. But if that person's in a hurry, it's no good. It's not going to work. If that person is kind of agitated or seems like maybe they're just not in a good, you know, headspace right now, I'm going to let them go. If someone actively avoids eye contact with me, I'm going to let them go. But if I can get eye contact with that person, then I can start kind of assessing, like, okay, you know, if you make eye contact with me back, maybe I might smile at you a little bit. And if I can get you to kind of smile back, that's when I kind of go, okay, this person, maybe this is a person who's going to be open to this, and maybe they're going to be open to it right now. Maybe they're not too busy to do this right now. So I go through that checklist and that process in my head before I even say word one to them.
About 22 years ago, I interviewed the woman who hired models for Atelier Lac, which is a kind of famous figures, you know, sort of old tradition painting studio in Minneapolis, because now closed. And she said, you can hire a model on the phone. Does that make sense to you?
Oh yeah, because it's about, you know, I'm not looking for models. I'm looking for real people, and I'm looking for people who who are just open to the experience of talking to a stranger on the street. And not everybody's open to that. And this is Minnesota, after all. I mean, you know, we're not exactly known for our warmth and openness when it comes to our personalities. And I say this as someone who was born and raised here. But so I'm looking for the people who are open.
Have you ever seen Spencer Tunick's, I think it's called Naked States?
I don't think so.
He took a van through the United States doing nude pictures. One, you know, he documents one per state, and so there's the Midwestern section.
Ha.
And it is very exciting stuff. And one of the things exciting about it is that, on the one hand, of course, there is the Midwest Resistance, but there's also incredible energy in the Midwest Reticence. And
Yes.
the people who say, yes, this is going to clearly be an event in their lives, because nobody like me has ever done anything like that.
Right.
And so he has a process like yours, but with that added layer of, I'm taking one heck of a risk when I show up in front of this camera.
Yes. It's showing vulnerability. In both cases, it's showing vulnerability. To disrobe in front of a camera, showing vulnerability. To share something very personal about yourself with a stranger is also showing a lot of vulnerability. And not everybody's willing to be vulnerable. And I get that.
Yeah. And you're looking for the people who are.
Yeah, people, you know, and I've really learned. The thing about this project is that it's taught me so much about people. Again, inadvertently. I mean, when I started doing this, I had no idea where it would lead, and I had no idea how much I would learn about people. I really thought of it as a photography project. I thought what I was practicing was photography. But it turns out that what I was practicing is empathy. What I'm practicing is letting another person know that they're seen and that they're heard. And I've learned that that's absolutely critical for every human being. We all have a need to be seen and heard in this world. And this is something I can do that offers people that opportunity to share a part of themselves, because it's vital that we're able to be who we are and be recognized for who we are, and you know, I'm always interested in the things that we have in common, because I think that those things are stronger and more powerful than the things that divide us, which tend to be kind of exterior stuff. You know, I just have realized, you know, so much about just kind of about human beings and what the state of what does it mean to be human, you know? But part of what it means to be human is needing to be recognized and acknowledged, and people like talking about themselves. Most people like talking about themselves. You know, when you finally get down to it, it's like we want to talk about ourselves. So it's again, if I can find the right person, and sometimes the people I'm approaching, because they are marginalized, either because of, you know, homelessness or addiction or, you know, mental illness, it's even more important to those people to be seen and heard and acknowledged, because so often people who are marginalized are ignored. And that's really dangerous stuff. We're social beings. We're not here on this earth to live in isolation, and yet we isolate certain people. And so, you know, this is really, the whole project is about connection. I mean, again, it's not about photography, it's about connection. It's about me going out and making a connection with somebody and documenting that connection through the text, through the audio, and through the photo, and then sharing that on social media. And then people who see it, my followers, then also feel connected to that person. So that's really what it's about for me.
I was remembering something from teaching, it must be 17 years ago now, the first time I did a residential class, and we had a deafblind student.
Mm.
Now, deafblind awes me, and the idea of somebody managing with that as their problem is hard for me to get my head around at all. And I remember, it took me the longest time to just come up to her and talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
And there were plenty of opportunities. But I'm wondering where you're difficult, where you found your biggest difficulties. Where it took you the longest. This is somebody I need to talk to. How do I do it?
Well, it always happens very quickly. I mean, this is my chance. If I don't approach someone, if I see someone and I want to approach them and I don't do it, the opportunity's gone. Yeah. And I actually have become, I had to learn how to be okay with that, because it's going to happen, but I always there's always something challenging about it for me. So that's just how the project has evolved. So initially the challenge was just simply getting the nerve up to approach anybody to take their picture. Just doing that was literally something I had to force myself to do, and I had to talk myself into it. And I would just sit there and I'd just be like, you gotta go do it, and sometimes I would do it and sometimes I wouldn't. But what I found is that when I didn't feel good. And when I did feel good. And so I finally realized after some time, you're going to make your own life easier if you follow that urge than if you don't. So initially that was the challenge. And then along the way, the challenge kind of changes. It's like the bar kind of raises. So I had definitely technical challenges for some time. So there was a certain period where I was struggling with getting to know my equipment a little bit, and I was struggling to get the quality of photo that I wanted. And I was frequently going home and pulling up my files on my computer, and I didn't like what I see. Or what I saw, it was just like, I just didn't quite capture them, or I just didn't quite capture them the way that I wanted to, and but then I got better at it, But then there was another challenge. So then it was the challenge of adding that interview component, and the challenge of figuring out, well, what kinds of questions do you ask? How do you ask them? And how deep do you go? How far do you go? How much do you push people? And when is it right to kind of push someone, and when should you kind of pull away? So a lot of that interpersonal stuff was a challenge for a while. Just trying to figure out, again, how to gain people's trust. So the challenge just changes. Last year my challenge was putting out a book. That was a huge challenge, and something that took most of my time for a year. Now I have new challenges that I'm kind of putting in front of myself. So there's always, in order for me to stay interested in the work, there's got to be something challenging about it. If there's not anything challenging about it, I'm not interested in doing it.
So you've got some fundamentals in how you do things. I mean, they're very different than my fundamentals. I mean, one of them is that you're engaged. I mean, you're obviously physically engaged with the person. And in my situation, I have roughly the same advantage as the old box cameras gave one. there's essentially a screen. So the person is playing, but not in any straightforward way to me, and I announce myself at the beginning to be sort of on the spectrum, which means that, if the harder I listen, the less I look like I'm listening.
Right.
And so there's that, and then there's your time screen, which is, I'd say, you're saying 45 minutes max.
Sometimes more. It depends on the person. Sometimes some people are busier than other people.
And just once.
Just once.
Just once with any given person.
So far, yeah.
And in public.
Yes.
So not in their space.
Except for certain freelance projects, I might do it in their space, but for the most part, yes.
So your artistic project is limited by, or is sort of defined by the way you go after people, the space in which you go after them, certain limits on how much time you spend with them. These are snapshots. These are glimpses. Do you have any temptation to push any of those boundaries?
In terms of, well, I have, for certain, I did last year, I did a project for Meals on Wheels, where Meals on Wheels contacted me and wanted to have me interview people who received Meals on Wheels, photographing them in their homes. So I did a series with them, and that had that additional challenge of now, even just in terms of lighting and in terms of the environment, I didn't know what I was walking into when I'm walking into somebody's home. I have no idea, what's going to be my lighting situation in particular, but, that was different. But, for me, I'm always finding some way to make it hard. Yeah. But it's important to me that I take pictures in public places. Part of it is that the legalities of street photography say that you don't need a signed release if you photograph people in public. So that's one of the big reasons that I photograph people in public, is so I don't have to get releases from everybody. But yeah, it's changed. If you look back on my work, you'll see the evolution. You see how it changes. The photographs changed. The way that I've photographed people has changed. The questions that I've asked people have changed. Again, my ability to draw them out has increased. So all of these things have helped the work to just evolve kind of organically.
Yeah. Well, I find with the stuff I do that there are strange limits that feel firm for me for some reason. Like I'm not going to cross that one. And others that feel like it would be pretty exciting to cross that one. So for instance, I normally do one interview, except there are a few people I try to get every year. Mm-hmm. And when I bring a new person into the every year once a year club, that's exciting. Mm-hmm. There's a level of quality I don't quite try to push beyond. Because it's going to end. It took me a long time to get lights.
Yep.
Because it's a level more fuss.
Yep. Yes.
And I thought if I can stay away from it, but then I started getting things that looked like gothic video, and no, I can't quite do that, especially with people who were basically very expressive if you gave them a chance. Mm-hmm. But there are all sorts of this difference between the boundary that defines your project, that makes it possible for you to do something of a certain sort, and the boundary that sort of happened by accident, and it might be really fun to push past it someday. that's I mean that's the thing I think about a lot, and it's interesting, just how that comes across to you.
Well, and it happens. I think it happens naturally because I think creative people tend to want to push those boundaries and want to kind of go, because you make these rules for yourself, but you're the only one that cares about following those rules. I mean, that's something I realized with this project because it is part of this, larger Humans of New York and these other hundreds of other, Humans of pages. There's kind of that template that was set up. But what's been really interesting to see is how each page has evolved and developed into its own unique thing. And so the way we do it is because I actually belong to a Facebook group that is all other people like me who administer and run these Humans of pages all over the world. So we get in conversations. I get in conversations with Humans of Dublin and Humans of Oslo and Humans of Las Vegas and all of these people. And we've all, over time, moved away from that original template into something that's a little more personal and a little more in line with, ourselves as individuals. And so I feel like the work just naturally, over time, has become, I've managed to put my thumbprint on it in a way that I think is unique to me and who I am and the way I see the world. Where if you look at some of these other pages, you're going to see something that, yes, the basic template, those basic rules are there. It's a stranger, it's someone you've never talked before, and you're talking to them in public, and you're taking their picture. I mean, that's basically the 3 rules. But other than that, there are no rules. So I'm always looking for ways to break out of that, because I get bored. I'll get bored if I do it the exact same way. So I've got to find something new, something like I said, something challenging, or it just becomes boring to me.
Have you always been a big city person?
I have. I kind of went back and forth. I moved to Montana. I did my undergrad in Montana after being at the University of Minnesota here, thinking that I was tired of living in the city, and I thought, I'll go move into the mountains and stuff. But as soon as I graduated, I immediately came back to Minneapolis because I realized that I am a city person. So yes, I do love big cities. I love not really always knowing what to expect, what's coming next. I love living downtown because there's just so many different kinds of people. I love being able to rub elbows with every type of person, basically. If you're willing to go out there and interact with people and engage with people versus, kind of staying in your own box, I mean, it just opens up a whole new world, and it's something that I feel energized by that.
I'm curious how you'd respond to the idea of moving down or up that scale. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff in little towns.
Mm-hmm.
Springfield, Minnesota, population 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
If you did your project in Springfield, by the time you had the book, you'd have everybody who was willing to be photographed in Springfield.
Right.
They would all know each other.
Yes.
And your website would be essentially the telephone exchange for
Sure.
all the interesting people in Springfield. I've did something like that in the neighborhood of Wyndham, and not that extensively, but you take a little postage stamp and you just keep asking until everybody's turning you down.
Right.
Now, does that have? I mean, I find that a very appealing thing, but I'm wondering how it strikes you. I mean, can you imagine moving to one of the little shrinking farm communities and taking the neighbors?
I can imagine doing interviews and photos in all kinds of places. Would I move there? Probably not. But I'm definitely open to, and I haven't, all my photos haven't been in Minneapolis. I mean, I've worked with the Hennepin County libraries and done, interviews with people in different libraries, suburban libraries. for the Meals on Wheels project, I was kind of all over the Twin Cities. So most of my work has been in the Twin Cities, but I'm absolutely open to doing something in a smaller town or somewhere else. For me, the key would be getting an invitation to do it versus just kind of going there, because I feel as an outsider, kind of just showing up one day and saying, hey, I want to do this project about the people in your town. I'm not sure that's really the best way to approach it. I think it would be better to be invited and kind of have somebody to open that door and kind of introduce me to maybe at least some initial people, and because I just think people would have a very good reason to kind of mistrust me, and it's all about trust. I can't draw people out, and I can't, get these kind of natural open photos of people if they don't trust me.
Now, the introduction is important. How does it work? How does it work with the work you do in Minneapolis? Is it do you depend on introductions?
Not for any of the street photography that I've done.
So, in a city, you can get by just saying, I have this website. Can I take your picture? But you wouldn't feel comfortable working that way, like in a place you didn't live or in a small town.
I would if I had, again, been invited by somebody from that community. I just don't think I would come in as an outsider and really expect to win people's trust, at least not in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, I would be more comfortable with someone inviting me in and helping me to gain people's trust, because I have a feeling that the way I would be perceived would be really as an outsider, where I just think in the city, again, it's a personal thing, whether you're an open person or, a trusting person and an open person, or whether you're more reserved. That's people in cities and small towns. I mean, it's more of a personality thing. But for me personally, it would only make sense to go somewhere else if somebody invited me there. Yeah.
There's the other side of it, which is the distance between Minneapolis and New York, let's say.
Yes.
I remember it was very striking. I was in New York during Sandy.
Mm.
And the power station. We knew the power station was going to be flooded. We knew that we were going to lose, this whole area of Manhattan was going to lose power, and sort of watching that come and realizing that these are, at minimum, these buildings are tall enough that just managing the stairs would put incredible stress on people.
Mm-hmm.
And managing the darkness, even if you had all of the sorts of things you need for an emergency situation.
Mm-hmm.
I sat there and thought, I'm sitting here with a bunch of camera equipment in what may be the journalistic situation of the decade, and I can't move.
Mm.
And there's no way in hell I'm going to go out and talk to people on those streets.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call that the same way, or I mean, how does that kind of risk with the I mean, there's a certain hominess about Minneapolis.
Oh, sure.
Even it's it's a
yeah.
city, but it's not New York.
I like to say Minneapolis is a big small town. I mean, let's face it. It's not, yes, we're a small city.
But if you'd been sitting in the brownstone that I was in during Sandy, would you have taken the camera and the recorder out?
No. I don't think so. I think I would have been more, for me, I'm really, I don't do this all the time. I'm either working or I'm not working. Because this isn't my full-time job. So it's not like I'm always in that mindset. So I really have to be in that mindset. And unless I'm in that mindset, I'm probably not going to do it. So, and I think in that situation, again, I'm not a journalist. So I'm not a news, I'm not trying to be, I'm not a current events, I'm not covering events. I'm not covering, the news or anything in like a journalistic way. So, I think my work has been influenced by journalism, and certainly because I worked for a magazine for so long and I worked with journalists, that's had an influence on me. But in the same situation, I think I would have been more in the moment. I think I would have been more focused on kind of what was going on with me, and maybe, I might have gone and talked to people, but I don't think I would have like interviewed them and photographed them, if that makes sense. I think going out and talking to people I would have done, because that I would have been very interested in, because, of course, anytime you have these common events, challenges that kind of come up in life, people come together. But I think I would have left the camera at home.
So how important is it that you're not always on?
Absolutely important. Because it's exhausting. It's exhausting work. It's very, very draining. And so because when I'm so focused on what I'm doing and I'm so in the moment, it's really, for me, what my work is, it's a practice, and part of that practice is there's a mindfulness aspect to what I'm doing, where I'm very much in the moment, and I'm very much focused on other people. So I'm not walking around with my camera thinking about, what am I going to make for dinner or whatever. I'm in the moment and I'm thinking about who's out there. I'm putting my feelers out there. I'm studying people. And when I'm doing that, it's very meditative. And then when I am talking to someone, I'm laser focused on them. Again, it's critical to my process that they know not only that I'm really listening to them, but that I'm listening to them without judgment. Because they are not going to tell me the kinds of things that I'm interested in having them talk to me about if they feel they're being judged. And so in order to do that, I'm laser focused. And because so frequently I get into conversations with people who are facing really serious challenges in life, the conversations can be pretty intense. And so it's very tiring. And so when I realized that, because I would go out and I would go out and I'd shoot for a couple hours and I'd come home and I'd just pass out. And I finally just realized, like, oh, this is actually like psychically and kind of emotionally very draining work, and physically, because I'm out there, I'm walking, for 2 hours, usually. So that was a boundary that I had to figure out at some point. I also had to figure out, because I remember there was a point where when I did carry my camera with me all the time, and when I was doing that, I found that I wasn't turning it off. So I was always in that mode. And I realized that wasn't a good thing for me, to always be in that mode. It interferes with just experiencing life and just, enjoying your day. Like if I'm always in that kind of working mentality, when am I off work? So I finally stopped carrying my camera with me wherever I went and just deciding, like, when I'm working and it's on my calendar, just like anything else. So I'm not just kind of randomly waking up and deciding I'm going to do this. It's, and I have other work that I do as well. So I have to have that boundary for myself, or I'll run out of steam.
So one of the puzzles I've had for a long time is what happens to these relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because occasionally, actually pretty often, I'll get people to tell stories that they haven't told their friends.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You stumble into it. Sometimes I get little writing above my glasses, ask about any recent illnesses. And, suddenly you've got something by the tail.
Mm-hmm.
Do you make friends ever?
I make friends all the time. And it's been really one of the kind of unexpected outcomes. One of the many unexpected outcomes is the friendships that I've developed. For instance, this is Fatuma. She's someone who, she actually contacted me and said that I should interview her. And so I took this picture the day that I met her, which now is 4 years ago, I want to say. And she and I are very good friends. In fact, when I leave here today, I'm going to go pick up Fatuma and we're going to do something together. I have, if I'm not friends with somebody, I stay connected with them. I'm Facebook friends with both of these people. This gentleman came to my book launch. Unfortunately, he's passed away since then. But his family used this picture at his memorial service. So, at the very least, at least now, at the very least, I try to, become Facebook friends with people who I photograph. But many of the relationships have turned into, either professional relationships or, people that I interview. We might end up collaborating on something else. But it's enriched my life so much. There's so many wonderful people who are in my life now who would never have, I don't know, I don't think Fatuma and I would have become such good friends if not for this project. And I could name a dozen other people that I feel the same way about. And so it's not only enriched my life in that way, just in terms of the people that I've made connections with, but it's offered me just a really valuable lesson in trying to see the world through multiple lenses and through multiple perspectives. So it's just a little easier now for me to kind of put myself in other people's shoes, because I'm constantly, that's what I'm constantly doing. I'm constantly just, meeting people and finding out why are they who they are. And that just enriches my life.
You're very lucky.
I am very lucky. I'm extremely lucky. I feel so fortunate that I found something that not only that I enjoy doing, and that I can share, and that people enjoy the work, but even more importantly, it are those relationships and even people. I've been able to help people. I've been able to. I have in my book. I've got some follow-up stories with people. That was one of the great things about doing the book, is it gave me the excuse that I kind of wanted, because I always sort of wondered, like, okay, so I post somebody's story and maybe they found it and maybe they commented on it or something, but what else happened, and oftentimes people will offer help, but I don't necessarily know if anything happened. It's like, did you follow up with that? Did anything happen with that? So when the opportunity for the book came around, it gave me an excuse to follow up with some people. And because I include some follow-up stories in there. And what I found out is that I'm having an impact, a real impact in people's lives, way more than I even know. And it's really taught me a valuable lesson, which is that all of our actions have a ripple effect. Whether they're positive or negative, they ripple out. And those ripples can become waves, and waves can become something even bigger for people. And so I've realized just the importance of being kind of just in my everyday life,